What does it mean to be receptive to the currents coming from the urn of the water bearer? From the future. So we could say that maybe one of the lessons of this transitional period is that there are people on Earth who will live in the mass mind consciousness. We live in an age, face it, accept it, folks, when the great majority of people, especially those who are still attached to religion and those who are caught in their narcissism. And of course, the internet and cell phones are tools of narcissism. Right? There's an epidemic of narcissism, and don't expect it to change.
Welcome, everybody. I'd like to welcome to the show a returning guest, mythologist, modern shaman, and writer John Lamb Lash. Welcome back, John.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Our previous conversation gained quite some interest, I would say, and it centered around the wisdom of the Gnostics and your book, Not in His Image. Towards the end of that conversation, we just briefly touched on a topic that I myself am very interested in and fairly versed in, I'd say also, or at least I thought so. The topic was astrology in general and the age of Aquarius in particular. Turned out we may have different views of certain aspects of that. So this brief exchange on astrology that we had led to continued communication between you and me, John, and we decided to do another podcast episode to sort things out. Because the age of Aquarius is, of course, a big deal in certain circles.
Yeah, it's a huge meme. And by the way, there is a Gnostic link here because there's an ancient source. It's actually the historian Josephus, I believe, and other ancient sources said that the key core group of the Gnostics, who called the sons of Seth, or the Sethians, that they were master skywatchers and astrologers and astronomers. And they even claimed that they invented astronomy. So there is a Gnostic angle to this subject. But of course, Aquarian age is a huge meme. And I really look forward to this talk appealing to many people who want to have a clear concept of what that is.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it as well. It's going to be very interesting because, as you say, I mean, there's every day you hear people referring to the age of Aquarius and whether we have entered it or not, or if it's going to happen in 200 years or tomorrow. Anyway, so I'll just try to briefly explain to the audience here, for those who are not so familiar with how things are depicted or described here, how Western or tropical astrology, as it's also referred to, is normally described. Western astrology has the full circle of the sky divided in 12 equally large sectors, which are the signs, the very known signs, Leo, Pisces, Taurus, Libra, and everything. So 30 degrees each and 360 degrees in all. And inevitably, the various constellations that correspond to the signs don't fit nicely and exactly within each within their respective sector. And in addition to this, I'm just trying to explain briefly for the audience here. In addition to this, the stars move backwards 1 degree every 72 years. The so-called great year, as it is referred to often, is mostly interpreted as the 25,920 years it takes for Earth to do a full cycle of the so-called precession of the equinoxes, or the wobbling of the Earth's axis, which is also, then this great year is also divided in the 12 signs, meaning that the axis points towards each sign for approximately 2,160 years, according to this interpretation. And this period, the 2,160-year period, this sector of the great year, is referred to as an astrological age. And in my view, and in many other, at least some of the astrologers I know there's their view as well, as I pointed out in our previous conversation. The different energies represented by the signs correspond to certain parts of the universe, certain parts of space-time, if you will, as seen from our planet, rather than emanate from the constellations themselves. So today we are going to learn, I guess, about a somewhat different type of explanation of what's going on astrologically, at least when it comes to the ages. Isn't that right, John? The floor is yours.
Yeah, well, I would more or less agree with your description, but I would tweak it in a couple of ways. When we were talking, just to refer back to our other conversation, you used the term space-time coordinates. So
I
wanted to ask you, in your conception of the signs, they are defined by space-time coordinates.
Yes, or like I said here, I mean the parts of the universe as seen from our planet, because the star constellations are not really a thing, because it's just what they look like seen from Earth. If you would go there to these stars, they would of course look quite differently depending on what angle you have, and they wouldn't have they wouldn't be depicted in the way that they are seen from the Earth plane, if you see what I mean.
Well, of course, that's true. Theoretically, we don't have any reports of anyone has gone out into the constellation of Orion or the constellation of the Scorpion. The fact is that it appears that they have remained relatively unchanged for many thousands of years. So, for instance, when you look at something like, let's say, this is, I'm going to use a clipboard here, and I'm going to show you.
Yeah, it's going to be like in the classroom, right?
Yeah, this is a planisphere. And this planisphere is something that astronomers constructed, not astrologers, based on Babylonian tablets containing observations of the sky. And these are actually what I call primitive constellations. So you can see one of them there. See, that's Pegasus, the square. It says Pegasu. And this is actually an accurate construction of Babylonian cuneiform tablets. And what you find in here is that the ancients observed very, very closely. They observed with great accuracy, astounding accuracy, these star positions. And so on the basis of a number of ancient models of the stars, such as the Dendera Zodiac, the Mayan Aztec Zodiac, and the Hindu Zodiac, and I'm talking about the astronomy that preceded astrology as such. Now, most astrologers agree, and historians of astrology, which I also am, agree that what we call the tropical format, and we'll get to why it's called that in a moment, was established by Ptolemy, the Greek astronomer Ptolemy, around 150 AD. And that is the model of the signs. So previous to that time, the observation of the sky and the measurement of the cycles was purely astronomical. It didn't use the 12-section format of the signs. And of course, we've inherited that, and that is the basis of astrology today. So this, again, is a planisphere of Babylonian calculations of constellations. Okay? These constellations that are shown here, particularly the Pegasus one right there, the square, you can see them. If you know where to look, someone will take you out at night, and I'll take you out. I've done this many times. But the trick is, and I think this is perhaps a good place to start, you can't see the signs. No. They're starless. So as a matter of fact, whenever we start talking about this subject, we have to bear in mind that we're talking out of two sides of our mouth at the same time. In the one respect, we're talking about signs. In another respect, we're talking about constellations. And you correctly made that distinction. But it's important to go more deeply into that distinction in order to know what precession is. Okay?
Okay.
So I want to say, as a preface, that I've taught astronomy a lot through the years, and I practiced astrology for 35 years, tropical, right? And when I used to teach,
have you done? Sorry, have you done that as part of your mythology research, or as a side?
both, both. So the system of the signs is a psychological model. You know, if you have the sun in Aries, you have a certain psychology. If you have Saturn in Cancer, square Venus in Libra, you have a certain psychological complex. You can read all that from the signs. But then when you go out to the constellations, it's a different code.
All right.
It's a different code to read.
Yeah, interesting.
So I'm going to talk about, in the past, I often had the experience when I started to talk about astronomy that people would kind of lean back like, oh no, please, and roll their eyes, okay? So I want to make everyone comfortable with it by telling you that what we say about astronomy here is actually something that you experience all the time, naturally, in the course of the year, except perhaps you've never had the opportunity to put it into a model. So all that we're asking you to do here, all that I'm asking you to do, just for a moment, is try to conceive of this model I'm going to show you, which explains what the signs are. And realize that what I'm showing you is something that you already know about, but you perhaps haven't had it explained to you in this way, right? So here's the model, right here. See this?
Okay, yeah, we can see it.
That model shows the signs. And those are my symbols. They're a little different from the ones you may know. But it shows the basic fact that one has to learn. There are two circles there, you see. One of them is called the celestial equator. See it?
Yep.
And the other is called the ecliptic plane. So it's a fact that the Earth has an equator like a waistband. And if you extend it out into the sky, it makes a plane, which is called the celestial equator. But the Earth is tilted. The way that the Earth goes around the sun, it's tilted relative to the celestial equator at about 23 degrees. And that accounts for the fact, and this is something everyone observes, that the sun is higher in the sky in the summer and lower in the winter. So there are 4 points in the model of the tropical signs. That's why it's called tropical, because tropical means to turn towards something. And it's all about how the pole of the Earth, relative to the ecliptic, turns toward and away from the sun, causing us to have the seasons. So everyone knows, for instance, we notice what are the 4 points? The 4 points are, let's start here with the summer solstice. See that? Summer solstice there?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the point that everyone knows when the sun is higher in the sky, around June 22nd. That's 1 point.
Yeah, on the northern hemisphere.
In the northern hemisphere. Then the sun begins to be lower and lower on the horizon every day. There's a point where it crosses the equator, celestial equator, and that's the fall equinox. See that?
Yeah.
So if you go from the summer solstice, which is the sign Cancer, through the sign Leo, through the sign Virgo, and when the sun passes from the sign Virgo to the sign Libra, then it crosses that ecliptical line and it gets lower and lower and lower until the winter solstice. That's its lowest point. Is that clear?
Yes, of course.
It's 23.5 degrees, and then it comes around again. Everyone
in zenith at the Tropic of Capricorn,
right,
when it's at its lowest here on the northern hemisphere.
So there are 4 points in the ecliptic model, and each of these 4 points, it's a quadrature, and within each are 3 sections. 4 times 3 is 12. Those are the 12 signs, which are divisions of the ecliptic plane of the Earth, not relative to the surrounding sky. You can look at this model and you can work with it. This is all astrologers work with this model, Western astrology, without any consideration of the stars whatsoever. you have to consider the stars when we go to the subject of precession. But before we go there, I'd like to make it very clear that this astronomical model, which a child can learn, explains the seasons. So everyone notices that the sun is higher or lower during different seasons, right? Relative to the horizon. But there's something else that they don't notice. And this is a hidden factor. It has to do with gaining and losing light. So there's a velocity factor involved. When we, each day after spring, we gain more light at a certain rate each day, a certain number of minutes each day. Everybody knows that, right? Without calculating it, we sense that, right?
Oh yeah, and a lot of people, I mean, who are interested in the weather and the changing of the seasons and everything, they check the sunrise time and the sunset time every day, and they can notice that it's 3 minutes on each side now at this time of year, and it's 1 minute in early February. So, I mean, of course.
That's right. We've all observed that, but we perhaps haven't conceptualized it in a fixed model like this. So the point is, what are the space-time coordinates of the sign Cancer? Well, they are defined by where the sun is relative to the Earth in space, which direction it's taking, going up or down, and which hemisphere it's in. Is it above or below the equator? So if you were to give an exact description of the space-time coordinates of the sign Cancer, this is how it would sound. It's that phase of the solar motion that we observe, okay, when the sun at extreme declination in the north begins to gain velocity moving toward the south. Because at the solstice, it doesn't have any velocity. You don't gain or lose any time. But as the sun moves from Cancer, its highest point, through the sign Cancer, Leo, and Virgo, you lose time. And you lose time at an increasing rate. So when it comes to this point, which is the fall equinox here, see that? Fall equinox. By the time that this phenomenon of the sun passing over the horizon, it gains most light at the equinoxes. And then after the equinox, it starts to lose light slowly until it gets to the winter solstice, and then it starts over again. So you can define any sign. For instance, what's the day and year, the day and month of your birth?
Me? You're asking?
Yeah, just the day and month.
Yes, it's August 1st. Yeah.
Okay. So August 1st, get out my fairly ephemeris here. This is an ephemeris, by the way. This is what astrologers use.
Yes, I've seen those kinds of books, yeah.
Most people now, most astrologers go to, computer-generated horoscopes. But let's say, okay, on August 1st, we have August 1st, we have 9 degrees of Leo. Okay? So what are the space-time coordinates for your sign? Right? You were born in the phase, one of the 12 phases, when the sun, located north of the celestial equator, is inclining south, and it reaches the mean velocity for the entire period. Those are the space-time coordinates of Leo. And I could define every one of the 12 signs in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, but it sounds more astronomical than astrological, but yeah, I'm eager to hear your continued explanation here.
I'm eager to hear how you or I or anybody can explain how those astronomically defined coordinates can generate personality types.
Oh, that's a philosophical and deep question. It's a matter of course, noticing what is going on and taking note of people's different traits and all that. And I mean, what would it? Well, it does correspond to some kind of external environment in space, I guess. Also, it's not just
only the environment of the solar system. We're only talking about the solar system here. We haven't started talking about the stars yet, because that's where we go to precession.
Yes.
So these personality types and these complexes are defined in some way. They're astronomically defined by this model. Okay.
Yeah.
Wherever the planets are here indicates psychological complexes.
Yeah.
So if you happen to be, say, born in the 9th degree of Leo in that sign, you might have Jupiter conjunct the sun in Leo, and the astrologer reads that as a personality complex, right? How does that happen?
Well, I'd say that they are representative of certain traits and properties that are in space-time as we perceive it. I mean, this goes deep, because I just recently had a conversation with Julia Mossbridge, who studies a lot this concept of time and whether time exists or not, and what consciousness is and everything. And I don't think that time, if you look under the hood, so to speak, of reality, then which we can't do living on this three-dimensional Earth plane, because that would be very confusing for us. But if we did that, we would see that time doesn't really exist. But in this particular world that we live in, this three-dimensional reality, we are constructed in a way that we perceive time as something that is happening, that there is a future and that there is a past. So this time is because, I mean, the whole concept of astrology and the signs being corresponding to certain traits and certain personalities has to do with time, because it all starts with the exact moment when you take your first breath, when you're born. Then you have your birth chart, and that sets the as they say, the astrologers, the scene for I mean, the potentialities of your life. It doesn't say that everything is written in stone, but it says the potentialities of what kinds of experience you might have in your life. So it's all about time as we experience it here on Earth. So it's all about the spinning of the Earth around its own axis, and it's spinning around the sun, and the sun going around the galaxy also itself. So I think it's just these properties, these traits, these personalities are psychological reflections of positions in space-time as we perceive it from this Earth plane when we are born into this physical world. Does it make sense at all?
Well, yeah, in a way. I would return to the basic question: how, when, where, and who determined that you can translate the astronomical properties into psychological properties? You know, who determined what the characteristics of a sign Leo are, or a sign Sagittarius, or a sign Taurus?
Well, you're the mythologist and historian. Maybe you know about that than I would do.
Yeah, I'll tell you what my conclusion is after more than 5 decades of study. I can explain how astrology works. I can read charts, okay? And I've done it. I've consulted with hundreds and hundreds of people. Like I said, I practiced for tropical astrology for 35 years or more. I can explain how astrology works. I can tell you, if you have Venus conjunct Neptune in your natal pattern, what kind of psychological complex that represents, what options it gives you, what challenges, what opportunities. I can do all that. But I can't explain why it works. And
well, me neither. I just
No one can.
But historically, there are some, you can find perhaps some sources for this delineation between the different signs and the different personalities that they're supposed to have.
Yeah, historically, you can find characterizations. People have compiled data on characterizations, you know, what Venus means in your psychological complex what it means to be a Libra or an Aries, but no one, I guarantee you, no one can explain why astrology works. And let me tell you, it does work. I've had
yeah, I agree. But I mean, you asked me if I know how it works. Of course, I don't know that, but I can just, I can just note that it works. And
it's a trick question, Andres. I just want to say to everyone,
okay.
I can affirm you, I can assure you, absolutely, Scout's honor, no one can explain why astrology works. No one. Okay? But we're not concerned with that question today. What we're concerned with is how to go from the tropical astrological format to a knowledge of what is precession, which is obviously a much larger picture, right?
Yeah.
So how do we get from, we're going to put astrology aside now. Here's the model. It's very easy to understand. And we all know what the solstices and the equinoxes are, right? So how do you get from this to the Aquarian age? This is what we're looking at, right? So actually, that answer is simple. And that answer is not new. It's not radical. What I'm going to tell you is not new and not radical. It is the traditional definition. What is the traditional way to define the age we're living in? How is it done? How did the Egyptians do it? How did the Maya and Aztec peoples do it? They all did it in the same way because there is one simple tool for determining what age that we're living in. Okay? It's very simple. And it's one of the oldest rules in astrology and astronomy. So the rule says that the age, the current age, is defined by the position of the sun at the spring equinox, okay, March 22nd, against the background of the constellations. So this is when you get out of this model, which is starless, right? Yep. There are no stars in astrology. I wrote my book, Quest for the Zodiac, 24 years ago, and I said, look, astrology is not wrong on its own terms. You know, believe me, I used it. It's a brilliant tool. I mean, I could sit down. People would come to Santa Fe to visit me for readings, and total strangers. And within 20 minutes, I could be talking with them about the most intimate details of their lives.
Yes, it's fascinating, isn't it?
It's a brilliant tool, but it's a hard tool. Astrology is very hard to learn, and it's a continual learning curve to how to use it. It's a complex tool. But when you go from the starless model of the signs, put that aside, then you have to go to the stars.
Okay.
And these are the stars, see? These are the stars. Now you see those divisions, the lines dividing it?
It's not equal 30-degree sectors.
No. The constellations, which are observable sky patterns, are not equal. So that begs the question. Let's go back to your previous reference. And this is a reference I run into a lot. Everyone will run into it. You divide the 360 degrees of precession into 12 equal ages, which are each, 2,150 years?
No, 60.
No, doesn't work. Because it's not the even divisions of the signs that determine the age we're in. It's what lies beyond the signs. It's what lies out there in space, way, way out there, beyond. See that? Those are the constellations that you can actually see. I call that one the whales, but that's the fishes.
Mm-hmm.
Constellation of fishes. The ram, you see the names, the bull, the twins. Now here, I'm just going to take 1 minute to explain something that's very important. One of the great confusions about the age of Aquarius and all of the ages is that astronomers use the Latin terms Aries, Taurus, Gemini for constellations, and astrologers use them for signs, but signs and constellations are not the same. So this has been very confusing, and it's one of the first things that needs to be understood in order to approach how we measure precession. So these are the constellations. Now you notice the cross, the four angles, okay? Those are the 4 points of the year. The VP, you see where it says VP?
Mm-hmm.
That's called the vernal point. So that is the place where the sun is on March 22nd, against the background of the constellations. But of course, you can't see them because you can't see the constellations when the sun is there, right? And the other points, the same 4 points that are on the model I showed you are on this model. So at the top, you see where it says WS? WS, winter solstice, okay? That's where the sun is at the winter solstice. It's between the snake tamer, which is the 13th constellation, and the archer. Over here, you have the autumnal equinox. That's where the sun is at the moment of the fall equinox, which is around September 21st, right? That's where it is against the background. And here, of course, SS, the summer solstice, that's where it is at that moment. So when the sun is highest in the sky at the end of June, if you could see the stars in the background, you would see the constellation of the bull, not Aries, not Taurus, and you would see the constellation of the twins, not Gemini, and you would see the sun there. That's how you determine precession. Simple. So what I've had to do, and you're getting a little glimpse of my language, when I worked this out in Quest for the Zodiac, I explained that because of this confusion of astronomers using the word Leo and astrologers using it for different things, obviously it creates a lot of confusion. So then what I did was I said, well, let's call the visible, observable constellations by what I call their storybook names. So I say the fishes or whales, okay? I say the ram. I don't say Aries. Aries is the sign. Ram is the constellation. And so on, all the way around. Ram, bull, twins, crab, lion, virgin, scales, scorpion, snake tamer. There are 13 constellations and only 12 signs. Ophiuchus is what it's traditionally called.
The yugas, like in the Vedic texts?
Is Ophiuchus in the Vedic text?
Oh, I thought you said the yugas, but you didn't.
No, Ophiuchus. We'll talk
sorry.
about
Sorry.
Ophiuchus, the snake tamer, archer, goatfish, and what I call the manitu. So my name for the constellation of Aquarius is the manitu. Okay, and maybe I can get around to explaining the reasons for giving it that name and giving it that designation. Okay, so now I just want to point out, if we agree, I want to make sure I have you on board, the traditional rule going back before history, as far as we know, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Chinese, is that the position of the sun against the background of the constellations determines the age we are in. That's the traditional rule.
Mm-hmm. As far as I understand, that's how it is. Yeah.
So to know what age we're in now, all we have to know is where the sun is at the spring equinox, and we know what age we're in. You know, I have a considerable library of astronomy and astrology books, and also archaeoastronomy, which is a fascinating subject, which is about the alignments of different temples and sacred sites to the sky, which is absolutely extraordinary how the ancients could do this with precision. There's a Mayan codex called the Dresden Codex, which has an ephemeris of the positions of Venus which is accurate to 4 decimal points to the data known today. How could they do this? You see, they were brilliant. We've lost a lot of that sky watching knowledge. I've tried to bring it back by taking people out and teaching them the constellations, and by trying to restore it as much as I can. So the question everyone wants to know is, let's call the spring equinox the hand of the cosmic clock.
Okay.
That turns every 25,920 years. Let's call it the hand. Where is the hand pointing? Then we know what age we're in. One of the books I have in my library, I don't have them here now, is a survey, and I remember reading in it that the author said in the preface, there have been over 80 estimations of when the Aquarian age begins. But that's entirely unnecessary. If we follow the rule, why would there be 80 explanations? So here it is. I'll show you.
Yeah.
See where it says VP?
Yeah.
That's the position of the sun at the spring equinox. And what constellation is it in?
The whales.
Fishes.
The fishes, yeah. The Pisces, the age of Pisces, as it normally referred to.
Yeah, but again, you're referring you're using that same terminology over and over again.
Yeah. But okay, so I have a couple of follow-up questions to this now, because I think we agree on the personality part of astrology, that it works and nobody knows why it works, but and it's based on signs, and signs are completely different things than constellations. I'm completely on board when it comes to that. But now all of a sudden we look at this constellation, the stars and the ages, which are also something that happen gradually as the Earth wobbles, as the Earth has its great year. But now all of a sudden, the things that are out there in the sky, which is constellation stars, are suddenly the important factor here. And now another question is, of course, I have to ask first, is do you believe that the ages are associated with certain properties?
I believe that the ages, I've looked into this question deeply, and my conclusion that I reached a good many years ago was that this knowledge that we're talking about here, that we're introducing, the actual traditional rule for knowing what age we're in, following astronomical precision, okay, was the elite knowledge of the initiates in the past. And they were the ones who studied the sky and the cycles of time. And because they were masters of their craft, they were able to conceive of human evolution on Earth in a vast time frame. Okay? For instance, the time frame of the age of the ram, okay? So, let's see, is 1800 BC to 120 BC. During that
you had a picture showing the division between the different ages. Sorry. Yeah.
That's the ram right there. Whoops. That's the ram below the fish. It's a very small constellation, and you can see the age of Pisces is much longer than the age of Aries. Can you see that?
Yeah, but how can you delineate it so, precisely? Because naturally these constellations are, well, we talked about it before, that they look like that from the Earth. They wouldn't look like that if you went out into space. But how can you decide exactly where the delineation between one age and the next is? Because there's one star, and there's another star, there's a third star, and they're all part of this constellation as we define it. And then there's a gap, and then there's another star, which is the first star of the next constellation. So where do you draw the line between the last star in the previous constellation and the first star in the next constellation, if you see what I mean? How can you do that?
Point. That's very good point.
It is, isn't it?
One of the problems that one of the problems that I faced, and that everyone faces when you're working with the real sky zodiac, okay, the observable stars. And in my opinion, by the way, it doesn't matter what they're like out there. What matters is how they look to us.
Yeah, I
You
agree.
have to realize that our species has been looking at these constellations for thousands and thousands of years, and they are imprinted into the psychic field of the human species.
I'm completely in agreement with you.
The question you raise is very valid. It is a fact that in some cases, the boundaries between these constellations are really clear. But in other cases, they're not so clear. And in some cases, they overlap. Okay?
Even that. Mm-hmm.
So if you look at this, I'm going to use my clipboard here, you can see that the boundary, I say that the boundary between the Aryan age, or the age of the ram, as I would call it, and the Piscean age is very exact, 120 BC. Why? Because if you go back and look, you wind the star clock back, you find that the spring equinox was exactly at the division line between those constellations, which is relatively clear. Let me draw it for you if I can. I'll just show you where it is. Okay, so there you see the whales or fishes. So the Piscean age began when the spring equinox shifted from the ram into the fishes, from Aries to Pisces. And that division is very clear. But when you go over here and you look ahead in time, you see there are two fishes, right? And notice that they don't swim in opposite directions, which is something you often hear.
Well, it's often depicted as that when it comes to signs, when you have the sign of Pisces.
Right, but the signs, the symbols for the signs are very misleading.
Yeah, okay.
So clearly, the two fishes swim at right angles to each other. This is extremely important in answering what is the meaning of the Piscean age, which we're going to get to at the end, okay? We'll get to that soon. But look here. Look at the fish that is moving along the circle of the ecliptic plane, and it's moving toward this figure that I call Enki. That's Aquarius, the water bearer. So look at how they overlap.
Yeah.
See that?
Yes.
And you get a lot of overlapping in other places as well. For instance, here's a clear division, though. There's the constellation of the Lion, and the last star that marks the constellation of the Lion, you see there's a lion's body. The tail star, the nebula, has a certain degree, an exact degree. And the calculation of that degree is the transition moment from the age of the Virgin into the age of the Lion. So in some cases, it's a very good point you raise. In some cases, the transition of the ages can be determined accurately, but in some cases, it's vague and they overlap. And so the determination of these boundaries is a really important study.
Okay. If the ages are associated with certain properties, which we haven't really talked about yet, then did something important happen around 120 BC when the age of the ram switched over to the age of the fishes?
Absolutely, it did. By the way, let me answer your question. In my opinion, the meaning of the ages is about lessons. It's about lessons for humanity, great, grand, encompassing lessons. So we could go back and look at the period from 1800 BC until 120 BC, and we could say, what were the lessons for humanity to learn in the age of the ram, or the Aryan age? And then we can come forward from 120 BC to the current age, which is Piscean age, and it's a long way before the vernal point hits Aquarius. A long way.
And then there's an overlap also, which means that
even considering the overlap, it's a long way to the nose of this whale.
Can you tell us whether we are in the overlap time right now, or is that why there's so much confusion as to when?
Okay, very good question. And this is something I've devoted a lot of time to. And what I would do is describe it in this way, but let me make my point because it's really important.
Yeah.
They were ancient seers and sky watchers. They were master astronomers. And can you imagine people who are able to look at the agenda for humanity, the agenda of our evolution, and stand back and say, during these 1,000 years, this is the main thing we are evolving and learning. And during this 1,000 years, that's the perspective they had. And I've tried to recover that perspective. And the way that you do that is you go back to the constellation and you map every single star in the constellation and put a date on it. And then you go look at what happened historically during those dates. So this is called a chronography. So when you study the ages, the material, the research material is historical. So what happened in the Aryan Age? Well, what happened around 1800 BC? Well, most historians agree that that was the beginning of the founding of the Abrahamic religions. And most historians say that if Abraham, the father of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they're the Abrahamic religions, actually existed, it was around 1800. So it's the beginning of the age of Abrahamic religion and patriarchy. And then when you come ahead to the end of the age, you see, because the constellation of the Ram has horns, okay? And you come ahead, here it is right here. Okay, see how the Ram is small? See the Ram there?
Yeah, I can see the sector is very small. I'm not very familiar with the constellation itself, but I can see the sector is small.
And then there's that dividing line. You see the fishes are attached by a cord. See that?
Mm-hmm.
And the cord has a knot at the bottom. And that knot is identified by a particular star called Erishka. And if you go and calculate the time of that star, you know pretty much exactly when the equinox moved into the whales, the fishes. But when you look at the Ram, you say, okay, at the beginning, the spring equinox moves backward through the Ram, from the rear end to the head. That's why it's called precession. It moves backward against the order of the constellations. That was the beginning of the age of Abraham. But then when you look at the horns of the Ram, that was the end of the age of the Ram, which was around 400, 300, 200 BC, the age of Alexander the Great. And it's very interesting when you go and look at Alexander the Great, you find that he had himself depicted with the horns of the Ram. So there are two kinds of authority figures. What is the lesson of the age of the Ram, or the Aryan Age? It's about what kind of authority humanity chooses to lead. Does it choose religious authority, religious dogma, doctrine, salvationism, the Messiah complex, the apocalypse? Does it choose Abrahamic religion, or does it choose heroes like Alexander the Great? Who are the best leaders? We had to decide in that time. That was the lesson of that time. Who are the best leaders of society, of nations? You know, are they religious men with beards who pretend to speak for God and give you rules to live by? Or are they true men, true heroes, men and women both? Because there were women heroes also at the end of the age of the Ram. You see, that's the idea. Imagine being able to sit back and read the sky. You see, you interpret the signs of the zodiac psychologically, but you read the constellations, you decode them. You have to decode them. It's a code in the sky, and the ancients could read this code. So what happened in 120 BC, that was the key event in the transition from the Aryan Age to the Piscean Age. What happened? Well, bring your attention to the most troubled place on Earth. What is the most troubled place in the world?
Today, well, I guess it's a battle between, no pun intended, Ukraine and the Middle East?
Well, that's very recent. What has been the most troubled place in the world for the last 2,000 years and continues to be?
Well, the Middle East.
Palestine.
Palestine.
Something happened in Palestine, in ancient Judea, and that was called the Maccabean Revolt. And the story of
when the first temple was destroyed?
Yes, a little later. So there, in religious history of the Middle East, certain things happened at the beginning of the Piscean Age, and those events set the stage for the lesson that we need to learn in this age. What is the lesson that we are mastering in the Piscean Age? And we still have a considerable way to go in order to master it. So Christianity and Christian faith is the biggest problem of the Piscean Age. And it's not so much the question whether you embrace Christianity, my faith is a big problem of the Piscean Age. It's not so much a question of whether you embrace it or not. It's a question of what is to be learned from looking at how it behaves. How does that belief system behave in culture, in history, in education, in politics? And deciding, well, is this Christian faith in an off-planet Father God and a divine human hybrid working? How's it working out for you? Mm-hmm. The hardest lesson of history is to realize how we have been betrayed by spiritual and religious ideals.
I have to ask you then, going back to the ages and the astrology of this, you talk about the age of the fishes rather than the Piscean age, but now you talk about the Piscean age anyway. So are these constellation ages related to the corresponding properties of the signs? I mean, some people are. People are talking about these ages in many ways, the way you do now, and connecting it to the traits of Pisces, meaning that it's an age. You say no, okay, because Pisces is often associated with being following a leader and being unclear of your destination and things like that.
I'll tell you what the problem is, and it's a huge problem.
Yeah,
the signs carry attributes and psychological characteristics and complexes. That's a given. That's been proven. Astrology is valid, even though it's wrongly called astrology because it's not based on the stars. There are no stars in astrology except the sun. Okay? Unfortunately, there is a muddled zone, a gray zone, where some of the attributes and characteristics of the signs have been mixed up with the character of the constellations, right? There's a muddled zone in the language and the discourse. Even as we're having this conversation, I think listeners can see that it begins to get in this zone. Well, are the characteristics of Pisces, the sign, similar to or corresponding to the lessons of the Piscean age?
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
No. Everyone has got to learn the lessons of the Piscean age, whether you're Aries, a Taurus, a Gemini.
Well, of course, but I mean, it's general. We are all one as a humanity as well. I mean, that's a no-brainer, I guess.
So I'm just warning that those associations, those correlations, are more confusing and misdirecting than they are valuable. You have to learn to talk out of two operating systems. When you talk out of the operating system of the signs, you talk psychology. When you talk out of the operating system of the constellations, which I do, and I've written enormously about and taught, you're talking a combined language of history and myth.
Okay, so it's history and myth and lessons to be learned. That's the thing with the ages.
That's right.
And they have nothing to do with the signs and the characteristics that are associated with the signs, right?
That's right. It's best to keep them separate and not muddle the two.
So the age of Aquarius, then, we might get into that now, which we are entering at some point, does not have very much to do with the characteristics and properties of of the sign of Aquarius, which many are. I mean, they're talking about it as if it's a given that those characteristics are those that are going to to characterize that age. But it isn't.
Extremely confusing and extremely unfortunate. And I guarantee you, don't mean to brag, but I have spent 40 years trying to sort this out for people to understand. So perhaps I can nail my point by explaining, for instance, if you're a Pisces and you are born at the beginning of the sign Pisces, let's say 3 or 4 degrees of the sign Pisces in the zodiac, the sun is actually in the constellation of Aquarius. Now, this brings up another point of confusion. There have been schools and writers who have said, oh, the signs are all wrong. You're not, someone would say to you, oh, you're not really a Pisces, even though you are in the sign model, you are a Pisces. Mm-hmm. You know? But look, the sun was in the constellation of Aquarius, therefore you're an Aquarius. But what I have learned, and this is an imperative point, please see if you can take this away, that the positions of the planets and the sun and moon in the constellations do not designate personality types. Mm-hmm. It's something beyond. It's another operating system, which we can't get into now. It's called celestics. Celestics. So everyone who has, say, a horoscope, see that? That's a horoscope, right? You see it?
Yep.
So there's the signs around it. There are the planets inside it, right? Everyone has seen their horoscope. No stars, right? There are the stars. So when you project all of those planets into the stars, you're operating on another code. It's another operating system. Mm. And that's the operating system that the ancients knew, and it existed long before astrology as we know it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's, I mean, who am I to know? But are these, that code, that different code, is it like, should you see it as if these stars themselves are imprinting some kind of characteristics on us, on humanity as a whole? Or is it just also, does it also have to do with some kind of time frame or space-time coordinates, or is it the stars themselves, period? And what's happening? Is it like they're emanating some kind of energy?
No. Two things that I entirely reject and have rejected all through the years. First of all, as I said before, no one can explain why astrology works. Yeah. What are beliefs? Let's not bother our heads about it, okay? Let's just use the tool, right? And the other is, I never talk about influences. In my opinion, there are no planetary influences and there are no star influences. So then what happens when you go out at night and you observe, say, the constellation of the fishes? Let's just say you're out with me and we're in the night sky. Now you can't observe it now because the sun is in front of that constellation. So you have to wait until a couple of months, and then you can go out at night and you can see the fishes. And they're like this. There's one big fish that leaps up and the other one that swims along that way. And it's a very dim constellation, but very beautiful, like a big V. And you can look at the composite stars, and each of those stars has a date. You can go date those stars, and you can then look at the historical events in the world that happened at that date, and you build what I call the chronography that goes along with the ages. So if you're looking at that constellation, this is what's actually happening to you. As a human animal, you operate with a nervous system and a neurological system called the brain. And that is a receiving and transmitting device, like a radio. And it runs on what are called engrams. An engram is a program in your neurological circuit, not merely in your brain, but also in your senses. So our normal life of thinking, perceiving, tasting, touching, smelling, hearing, and so forth is run by engrams. They are the programs that run our human mechanism, and they are electrically defined. They run on electricity. When you stand there and you look at the constellation of the fishes, which our ancestors have looked at for thousands of years, you are receiving the mirroring of the engrams that are in us in an outer form. So it's not a causal relationship to the constellations, it's a mirroring relationship. And the more you learn about those vast cosmic engrams, the more you learn about the engrams that operate in the human psyche. That's the study. And it's an enormous study, obviously. And so the idea of influence doesn't really work. I preferred it to compare the constellations to a biofeedback machine. They're signals, but they're not influences. Mm. So there are signals coming from the constellation of the fishes, signals coming from the constellation of the ram. And when you go out and you can read those signals by decoding that operating system, then you can incorporate them into how you think and how you see the world. This is what you learn from the great field of what is called sidereal mythology. So I'm a comparative mythologist, and I've compared myths from different cultures and times. But within the field of comparative mythology, there is a niche. It's called sidereal mythology, which is the mythology uniquely associated with these vast engrams.
Mm. Fascinating. So before we wrap this up, I would just like you to talk a little bit now about the overlap between the age of the fishes and the age of Aquarius, which you called something different. I can't remember what you called it.
I call it the age of the manitu.
Manitu.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
When I was working out these constellations, I did it by observation and by study, historical study, observation, learning the sidereal mythology. And you have to go out and look at them to learn them. You have to have that eye contact. It comes right into your eyes. And that's the way you learn them. The signals do permeate you. It's a mirroring. The cosmos is the mirror of the psyche. So I worked on each of these constellations for many, many years. And I've had the opportunity to compile a vast body of research. What are the themes, motifs, and lessons of the Virgoan age, of the Leonine age? I have all this data. So, of course, we want to know what are the characteristics of the Piscean age, I'm going to call it that, but it's the age of the fishes, and the next age. And what are the lessons, and how can we situate ourselves in that? So you have to look closely at the overlap. So I'm going to show you what the overlap looks like. This is what the overlap looks like.
It's pretty vast.
Now, you see where it says VP?
Yep.
And you see that arrow? That is where the sun is now. It is indisputably in the constellation of the fishes at the spring equinox. Now, you see how long that fish is, that whale, out to the nose? How many years is it? Because that arrow moves clockwise, okay? How many years is it before that arrow turns and points to the nose of the whale? About 800.
From today?
Yeah, from now, from 2024. However, there is an overlap. Now, I've studied this overlap a lot. You see, there's the Manitu figure. I don't know if you can see it very well. It's sort of you see its head there. You see how its left arm is stretched out toward the constellation of the goatfish?
Yeah.
You see its two legs, and you see along its right side, you see its right arm down along its side, and you see something there. You can't see it really well, but it's an urn. It's an amphora.
The water bearer.
Yeah, that's why it's called the water bearer. And I was trying to figure out, well, how can we be so far if you were going to say, well, the Piscean age ends when the vernal point reaches the nose of the whale? We got a long haul ahead, right? Wow. And I said, no, it's not like that, because the graphics of the constellation show something else. They show that there are currents streaming from this urn. So imagine that he's the water bearer, or she, and imagine coming out of that vessel, there are currents, and obviously the fish is swimming into those currents. So the overlap can be imagined at the point where the Western whale, that's called the Western whale, the one that swims toward the water bearer, the point where the Western whale reaches the currents coming from the water bearer. How can we define that in cultural terms? How can we define that in a paradigm of some kind? What is the lesson for that? And that's where we are. So the division between the whales and the manitu is one of the hardest to determine. And we have to look very closely at this mythological scenario. Okay, what does it mean to be receptive to the currents coming from the urn of the water bearer? From the future. From the future. So we could say that maybe one of the lessons of this transitional period is that there are people on Earth who will live in the mass mind consciousness, in the group consciousness. And we hear a lot about this. It's called what? Mass psychotic entrainment. What is that term? Yeah, it's a common meme, right? That we live in an age, face it, accept it, folks, when the great majority of people, especially those who are still attached to religion and those who are caught in their narcissism. And of course, the internet and cell phones are tools of narcissism. Right? There's an epidemic of narcissism, and don't expect it to change. It's going to go on. You're not going to be able to change it. Foreseeing, seeing ahead, then you can live your life in response to the currents of the future and not be caught in the undertow of the mass insanity. That's one of the lessons.
That's a little bit of what we are seeing right now, that there are kind of two trends simultaneously, that there are quite a few people like you and me, I suppose, who are kind of detaching from that mass formation and that mania that is gripping so many people around the world. And it's like we're living in two worlds, two Earths at the same time. Would you agree?
Yes, that's a meme that's been around, and when I did the Mandela Effect Decoded series of 64 talks, I explained in depth how we are, in fact, living in two movies at the same time.
Yeah.
Where there is a mitosis, actually a mitosis of the planet, of the planetary organism. So this idea that duality is the way of the future. It's not unity of humanity, and this idea that we can all live as one in harmony, and all we have to do is not misgender people and not offend them and not say anything bad about the Albanians. As long as we live like that, like good people, we'll make a better world. No, it won't. We have to separate ourselves from the mass entrainment psychosis and learn how to tune in to the future world that we can picture, even though it isn't there yet. So those currents coming from the urn are like frequencies of the future. And the one other thing I would say about the water bearer, as we wind up now, is that I renamed it. I had the most difficulty in defining that constellation. One of the reasons is when you go out and look at it, it doesn't look like anything. It's one of the most shambolic, weird constellations. It doesn't really have any definite figure that you can attach to it. And as I'm looking at it for ages and ages and trying to figure out where's the head, where's the shoulders, and at the same time, I'm trying to identify it. And I finally ended up by identifying it as the manitu. The manitu is a name from American Indian folklore, and it means the spirit of the wilderness. Spirit of the wilderness. And what is the spirit of the wilderness? Well, for instance, in the Lakota Sioux legend and lore, there was this figure called White Buffalo Calf Woman. In the shamanic visions of the Native Americans, they would go out on a vision quest, and they would encounter some animal usually, and that animal would teach them the lesson, and then they would go back to society and carry that lesson into the world, and they would represent a transcendental truth. So the manitu, if you are sensitive to the manitu, we're not there yet, and the masses are not going to get there for a long time. They will fall apart. That's rubble. That's collateral damage. Don't worry about it. The lesson of attunement to the manitu is to go back to the wilderness.
So, spirit of the wilderness is the lesson of the age of Aquarius, the age of the manitu, that which will come in a few hundred years.
One of them, right? One of them. So that's covered a lot. I wonder if we could just take 5 more minutes for me to show you something really special, which is about precession.
Sure. Do it. 5 more minutes.
If we agree that the hand of the vernal point points to the constellation, but look at a clock. Look at any clock. How many hands does it have?
2 hands, normally, or 3.
Let's put aside the second hand for a moment, and let's just say, well, a clock has 2 hands. It has the hour hand and the minute hand. So does the clock of precession have 2 hands?
I guess so, since you're asking.
Yes, it does. I'm teasing, of course, because I know the answer. Like a lawyer, never ask a question that you don't know the answer. Yeah, it does. And this is the remarkable feature that I discovered in the Dendera Zodiac. Okay? So one of the master models...
Dendera is in Egypt, isn't it? It's an ancient Egyptian thing.
One of the master models that I used to study the constellations is the Dendera Zodiac. There it is, right? And it's, of course, been studied by many, many people. So it has all the constellations. Scorpion, see the scorpion there? Yep. See the archer there? You see this line that comes down between the scorpion and the archer? See that? Mm-hmm. That is the other hand. That is actually, the thick line is actually the hour hand. And the thin line, which we've been looking at, you see how the Dendera Zodiac actually marks our moment in time. Because the thin line, which goes from the sheaf of wheat held by the goddess, right? See, she's holding up, that's the star Spica, which was used by Hipparchus to calculate precession. And if you draw a line from there through the center of the Dendera Zodiac, it comes out, and this is our age. This is where the vernal point is now, right there, under the tail of the western fish. Okay, so the Dendera Zodiac, designed over 2,000 years ago, points ahead to our age. But it also does something even more incredible. The hour hand is here. And this place that you see, that place, you see the archer with 2 heads? The archer is shooting an arrow at the scorpion. That place is the galactic center.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
And so the ancients designed the constellation of the archer. You know, when you look at the constellation of the archer, it doesn't look like an archer. Most of them don't look like what they are. The scorpion does. But somebody has to tell you, oh, see an archer. Picture an archer when you look at that, right? But the constellation of the archer was designed so that the archer aims exactly at the galactic center, which is above the stinger of the scorpion. Mm. So this proves that the people who designed the Dendera Zodiac knew where the galactic center was. And how recently have astronomers determined where the galactic center is? I think since around 1960, maybe.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Because I learned when I had my chart read by a brilliant astrologer a few years ago. She explained to me that the galactic center is 26 of Sagittarius, I think, and Sagittarius is of course
27
the archer.
Sagittarius. It's 27 of the sign Sagittarius. We're talking sign. Yeah.
So that's the archer, of course, Sag.
No, the archer is the constellation.
Yeah, I know, but it's associated with the.
So here's the cherry on the cake for all of you who are listening. The important thing to see here is that even though the vernal point does not reach the manitu into the manitu for several hundred years, the large hand aligns to the galactic center, the midnight hour on the cosmic clock. So we are approaching the midnight hour on the cosmic clock, which is.
And when is that? Is that right now, or in a few years, or in 100 years, or in 10 years?
2216. And in 2216, which is a little less than 200 years from now, the winter solstice will be aligned to the galactic center. That is the basis of all ancient zodiacs, that alignment. And the vernal point, the minute hand, will still be going through the constellation of the fishes. So the alignment of the midnight hour is different from the age that we are in. And the alignment of the midnight hour, in my opinion, is the most powerful event, cosmically speaking, in the distant future. Okay? So we don't.
192 years, something big.
Yeah, something like that. And that's astronomical. That's not, you can't dispute that. No one's going to comment and say it's not so, because it is exactly that.
And it's fascinating that these ancients knew all of this, as you say, long before astronomy even had a clue about it.
But look, that starry sky out there, where I've spent a great deal of my life and guided people, is the ultimate environment. We have the planetary environment, nature, mountains, clouds, skies, rivers, where it's very important that we align and attune to our planetary environment. When you agree, we must harmonize and attune to nature, which is one of the lessons of the Aquarian age.
Wise words, John Lash. Thank you so much for this, for enlightening us with these new insights and new perspectives on astrology. I'm sure that many of the listeners have. I mean, they're scratching their heads right now and thinking about what you just said. But a lot of it is, I mean, as you pointed out in the beginning, we do. I mean, coincide on much of the basics, not least on the zodiacal astronomy. But then when it comes to the ages, I mean, astrology, when it comes to the ages, it's could be a different story, as you are pointing out here. And very, very interesting, very fascinating. Never heard anyone explain it in that way before. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for hanging on, and also to the listeners, because we're trucking through a vast territory here, big chunks of information. And of course, some of it I could only present in a kind of sloppy or superficial way, but I do wish that the main points remain with you. So thanks for this opportunity, Anders.
Thank you, John. And I will put links to your websites and places to go if people want to know more about you and your work. Of course, I put the links in the description as always. So yeah, thanks again. Bye for now. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and don't forget to hit that like button and share the video with your friends. Please support the channel if you can. I appreciate all the support. You can become a Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or you can make a one-off donation via PayPal if you wish. All the links are in the description box below. Thank you.